Guten Abend, good evening, Talafalava. This is Dr. Snow Brown. Welcome back. Speaking to you all. Blessed Guten Abend. Good evening to my Knights and Chiefs of the 150 Days War Program, and also to my precious little munchkins, special lots, sorry lots that are part of my SCC1, SCC2, the Snow King Club congregation. Now, this evening, I know that last time that the topic was about me, a tribute for the new sovereign head. That's correct. And other warnings in general about the COVID-19 protections. Now, this evening, I have more revelations. I've got more revelations to share with all of you. Not only today being the 9th of March, that's correct, 2022, not only did I figure out today how these so-called son of a bitches inside this building, that's correct, because they're the only one, especially the son of a bitch in number 10 next door, that's correct. They're the only one that have been entering my address, this flat, that is part of 8th floor McCurdy Walk, Evening Town, Upper Hutt. That's correct. And there's 12 flats inside it, 11 are occupied, and they're the only ones that has been committing a lot of unlawful entries and home invasions in the last 8 years, going right back to the third, unexplained nosebleed between the 11th of August 2013 to the 16th of August 2013. So these are the only son of a bitches, especially the one next door, that's correct, that has been coming inside my flat and have been applying their so-called evil, harmful protocols, which might be drugging, poisoning, that's correct, or some other harm, or some other mind-controlling harms. Now, today, that's correct, I figured out when I called up ATT Security to discuss, to rebook another appointment for the technician, that's correct, to come back and sort out the issue with my video camera being, disconnected, that's correct. I discovered that the appointment that was booked for the technician to come to do the job, that's correct, on the 28th of February, between 11:30 and 12:30, I was told today that he felt unwell, and couldn't make it, and couldn't make the appointment. Well, they should have texted you, that's correct. So I don't know what you would call that, but that sounds like sabotaging, but that sounds like, a red, white demon, so-called harmful protocol, that's correct. That the poor technician got dealt to, that's correct. In other words, they don't want my camera to be activated. Well, it's no wonder, because if on the 3rd of March, when I went out, my suspicions, I always get these hunches, that's correct. When I took all the precautions that they were going to come in, well, they don't want to be caught on my camera, that's correct. So as I was talking to ATT Security again today, I discovered that there is no way that the so-called intruders, that can only be the red and white demon, from next door, that's correct, meaning the MMB KKK connection, that's correct, your cousin's connection again, bad connection, that's correct. They could not disarm my alarm system using a remote, because there is a special serial number that prevents the same remote from disarming any other similar alarm systems by the same company. That's correct. So I know, I racked my brain and I said, well, they would have had to have a remote. And the guy from ATT Security said, no, they couldn't have. They wouldn't be able to have, if they used another remote from another, client, with their own alarm system, it would not work because it's got a different serial number that is loaded on. That's correct. So I said to myself, well, they couldn't have come through all the windows because all the windows were sealed, and my flat is like two-story high and two-story upstairs. That's correct. There's no way that they could have climbed through the windows. And because, well, you've got an alarm in your bedroom, alarm in the lounge, and alarm in the hallway. That's correct. So there's no way they could have come that way. They would have had to come through the main entrance. They would have had to open the door to leave the note on the floor. That's correct. So can you imagine now the mystery of all this? That's correct. And then, as I was talking to the AD security, well, we can reset your password. That's great. I said, the problem is my phone is hacked. And what I mean is that every time if I should enter a password, that's correct, it gets recorded on the so-called keypad. So that means if the criminals, my next door son of a bitch neighbor, that's correct, has, installed some sort of app in the background where they can monitor and hack and screen, that's correct, my mobile, my cell phone, and also my Hotmail is also hacked into, and my Facebook is hacked in, then they're likely to be able to access my ADT app, that's correct. That's supposed to monitor the camera and everything else. And that where you can also disarm the alarm from. So I guess, well, the only thing the AED could do is that, well, they said, the alarm does work and is secured. I said, the problem is we've got the hacking issue. Hacking seems to be a problem. Normally alarm systems are not hacked into. That's correct. And internet services and even digital devices are not hacked into, if you lived in another address. Normally, for normal, ordinary citizens, that's correct, this kind of thing just doesn't happen. But for some odd reason, this son of a bitch next door and this so-called Red Demon organization locally seems to like doing this kind of thing, and your cousin's family seem to think that they can teach you lessons and improve on their strategies as criminal strategies, that's correct, by doing what they're doing, and yet they're breaking the law in doing so. I totally don't agree. I don't accept any of these criminal protocols that they're applying here. Can you see now how, security, the company ADT Security now is compromised? Their integrity is compromised? And even the conditions that governs the establishment of their organization and company is now also compromised by this son of a bitch next door? And his so-called deliberate unlawful entries? In the hacking and disarming of my so-called, alarm system? By hacking into my ADT app on my mobile phone? That's great. So that means I said to myself, well, normally you get a notification. He said, well, normally you get a notification on your cell phone to let you know if your alarm has been disarmed. I said, yes, it does. But only the ones where I have disarmed or have done something with it. But it looks like these son of a bitches, when they come inside, that's correct, unlawfully in my flat, they have learned to turn off the notification so that they can delete also the recording of when they disarmed it. And that's exactly what happened. I said the only way that these culprits could have come in on the 3rd of March was through the main door. That's correct. They would have broken the seal on my door, and then they would have had to enter, that's right, the passcode combination lock and have a key to turn to open the night latch. So they would have the only place they would have been able, the only way they would have gotten in was through the main door. Now, was there any witnesses there at the time? Between 11:45 a.m. in the morning and 2:19 on the day, at that time on the 3rd of March, when I disarmed my alarm with the remote. That's correct. Were there any witnesses? Well, I didn't see any witnesses at the time. The only witness that would have been reliable for me would have been my video camera just outside my door. But of course, it was disconnected at the time. That's correct. Anyway, there are two video cameras on the opposite side that belong to Kaingora. That's correct. Now, they're the only ones. They are the reliable witnesses. That's correct. On the day they would have seen and caught the so-called intruders and culprits that came in. That's correct. I really don't like Kaingaora at all. That's correct. I don't know what the security is doing with his job, but since the 26th of July, 2021 last year, when those 2 cameras were installed, that's correct, and my one was installed, the security camera should be doing the security guy who monitors and screens the video cameras, those video cameras that belong to Kaingaora. He should have been doing a lot of reporting. He should have been doing a lot of reporting to the police. That's correct. Because it looks like there has been a lot more unlawful entries. There's been quite a bit. There's been quite a lot of unlawful entries where you've been taught lessons, where I have been tortured the hell out of. My drugging, that's correct. Recently this year it happened. That's correct, when I went out. Now, on 3rd of March, it's confirmation that they did come in. And how did they get in? Well, they hacked into my ADT security app on my phone and turned off and disarmed the alarm. That's correct. That's how they got in. Because you can't disarm the alarm. The alarm would have sounded. The alarm would have, went off. The alarm would have been set off if they had entered manually. And of course, if they had a remote, they couldn't disarm the alarm. So the only explanation that I could conclude with today was that they had hacked in to my ADT app on my mobile. That's correct. And disarmed the alarm and then deleted in the system. But also they turned off the notification so that the notification would not come on my cell phone while I'm out to let me know that someone had actually disarmed my alarm. That's correct. I know. I don't know what you call this, but this almost sounds like a civil engineer. I mean, the level that these criminals, that's correct. Excuse me. The level that these criminals are committing these sort of crimes is just only a civil engineer. That's correct. Would do those kinds of things. It is so sophisticated. You see how, I don't know. I'll have to talk to ADT security again. There must be a way that they still receive recordings, notifications, that's correct, that somebody has they didn't have any record. So between 11:45 and 2:19, the time that I disarmed, they didn't have any record of any, that's correct, disarming of my alarm. That's how sophisticated this was. And yet the piece of paper is proof. The only proof that I can depend on is the camera from Kaingaora on the other side, on this level, that's correct, that would have recorded the culprits coming in and entering my Sogo flat on the 3rd of March between 11:45 a.m. in the morning and 2 o'clock or 2:15 before I disarmed my alarm with the remote at 2:19. That's correct. How do I know that my mobile phone is hacked? Well, I see a lot of things happening on my cell phone. Sometimes there are stuff being deleted, that's correct, which I didn't delete. And then, of course, when I try to upload pictures on a WhatsApp, that's correct, I find the function has disappeared, that's correct, has either been removed or turned off. And the other thing is my Hotmail, I notice stuff also being deleted and not. And the other thing that I noticed also a lot, that generally, if you try to, open your Facebook page, it asks for a code. There's a 2-factor code, that's correct. And sometimes, there is no code. That's right. I wait, and there's no code coming to my cell phone. So, and that is through my laptop and also through my cell phone, that's correct. So I'm waiting for the code to appear. It never does. So I have to try again and again. That's correct. So that's what I'm talking about, that this son of a bitch next door, who was the real culprit, that's correct, that's been doing all these hackings on behalf of the Mongol Mob Association, on behalf of this Red Demon, that's great, and also on behalf of their so-called White Demon, KKK, that they are in close connections with. And, you know, I really am disgusted. I am utterly disgusted with Kāinga Ora. Especially every MP, especially the MP that is in charge of the managing of this building here at this address. You know, I actually think this is a great setup. I actually think this was a whole setup. That's correct. So that I could be studied, but so that I could be used by this criminal association or criminal organization to improve, not only as an experiment, but to improve their so-called criminal strategies. That's correct. To find new ways to commit crimes on their digital devices. Now, as far as I'm concerned, that is a serious crime. That is a serious, that's a serious stuff to do. That's correct. To use somebody like that. But for them to take advantage of the tenancy also in this building, man, that goes against the Tenancy Act, the tenancy agreement. That's correct. I don't know what's going on with the ministers, but I don't like the government of New Zealand at all. When they allow this kind of criminal organizations, that's correct, to apply their criminal activities and criminal strategies to harm people like me and to study people like me, and also to what? To control our privileges. Hey, it's not fun. Not fun being tortured. No, it's not. And it's not nice either. They should be arrested. I reckon the government of New Zealand should be arrested for what happened inside this building. I also think that the sovereign head of England, the New Zealand, should also be arrested. Because they all seem to conspire with the police station, the sergeant of the police station, the New Zealand police, that's correct, to deliberately harm you, to subject you to tortures and cruelties, to allow these criminals to apply their harmful criminals where they're actually poisoning you, drugging you, that's correct. I'm not some gang basher. That's correct. This is not on. No, this is not on at all. You can imagine now how upset and angry I am today that I'm actually being used by a criminal organization. You've got the audacity. How would the sovereign head of Queen Elizabeth II feel if any member of her royal monarch and royal family were given that kind of depraved satanic, barbaric treatment? That's correct. Where they're not being used as guinea pigs, but they are actually being used by the likes of criminals. That's correct. To be experimented on and for also to be tortured for their criminal behaviors. It doesn't sound right. No, it doesn't sound right at all. What's going on inside this building? That the government of New Zealand and even Kāinga Ora and the police are now what? Covering up? They're actually covering up. They're actually aiding and abetting. They're actually conspiring to cover up these so-called criminal behaviors. I don't know, why would you do that? And who are you doing it on behalf? As I'm telling you right now, if these people here inside this building are committing these crimes, heinous crimes, and these secret crimes, and applying the harmful protocols, like hacking and stalking me on my digital device, and even dictating to my digital device and my privileges, then I'm afraid they are definitely doing it on behalf of the sovereign head of New Zealand, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. They are doing it on behalf of the Crown, the government of New Zealand. They are doing it on behalf of the police force, and they're also doing it on behalf of your rallies. And if they're also doing it on behalf of the citizens of the Māori King, that's correct. And 6, they are also doing it on behalf of your of the citizens, especially the people of Aotearoa in this country. You know, that's why England deserves the 400 ballistic missiles to come to their country. That's correct. You know that? You know that I'm a sovereign head? And you got no right to do what you did here inside this building? And not even in the last 8 years during my tenancy at this building? New Zealand, you deserve to be totally arrested by Nazi soldiers. You do. Except These bastards inside this building that have been, dealing to me, that's great. And that organization, including the white one, you all deserve the death penalty to be put to death by Nazi soldiers. For what you did, for what you did. You will never do that on behalf of the Māori King and his son. Ratbag of a son, that's correct. You will never do that on behalf either of any member of the Crown. Not even the royal family of England. I can't imagine that Her Majesty, the Sovereign Head of New Zealand, brackets Aotearoa, I really don't feel like saying it, that's great. Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II would dare actually allow these atrocities. Allow this kind of torturing harm of you in secret inside this building by a bunch of son of a bitches. That's correct. Criminals. I can't imagine. Because the next thing I'm going to say is, Queen Elizabeth II, I would love nothing more than to have your head on a silver platter and stuck on a stick and stuck on the stick. If this is the case, that you actually, Your Majesty, no, I'm serious. That's great. This is so fucking serious what's happening here inside this building. That your people here, the English so-called, that's right, the racist English arrogant son of a bitches in this country would dare what? Would dare try to dig my grave and harm me via the so-called son of a bitch, the brown niggers, that's correct, on your behalf. I can't imagine, Your Majesty. I can't imagine that Queen Elizabeth II would actually be jealous of my meek royal monarch. Your Majesty, you didn't do a very good job of being a sovereign head of this country. If you did, you would respect my meek royal monarch and my position also as a sovereign head of my own Crystal Kingdom, independent state that is a baby monarch. Queen Victoria, Her Majesty Queen Victoria, let me remind you again, Your Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Her Majesty Queen Victoria had more respect for Indigenous people's rights, and especially for noble Māori nobles' Indigenous rights. That's correct. Which unfortunately, as a sovereign head of New Zealand, I'm sorry, Your Majesty, but I am a citizen of this country and I should have been looked after. That's correct. My royal family should never have been targeted by any of, whether it be the people of Aotearoa in this country, and also by your people, by your racist, arrogant people. I mean, I've never had anything against you, Your Majesty. But after what your people did here, using these so-called brown niggers to try and dig my grave, let alone harm me at this address, and in this region of the country, especially in the last 8 years, going on 9 years, I'm sorry, Your Majesty, but you really are now an enemy to me. Enemy! I got no respect for you, Your Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Remember, you know very well my lineage. That's right, my heritage. But Your Majesty, I'm a king. I'm a meek king. That's great. If you want to have this war out of you, I'm telling you right now, that's correct. I'm not putting up for this. You're the sovereign head of this country, Your Majesty. It is your job, that's correct, to make sure that my interests are taken care of. My royal family are also respected and protected. But don't say that you only care about protecting the so-called rights of the Māori King, because the Māori King doesn't have any rights to my kingdom, let alone my meek private monarch, Your Majesty. That's correct. But your people, Your Majesty, you're the one who is supposed to be what? You're not a good sovereign head is what I'm trying to say. That's correct. If you did, you would arrest everyone that I complained about. The cameras don't lie. The cameras from Kaingaora have got the evidence. They got the evidence. Now, what is stopping the police from arresting these son of a bitches? I don't know. There's somebody there that is preventing that. And I'm going to have to blame you, Your Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, and the government of New Zealand, and also the Police Commissioner of New Zealand, the New Zealand Police Force. So if you're all going to conspire and gang up as a group against this sovereign head, this meek noble, Right, I am justified now in saying this, that you all deserve the death penalty from the Nazi soldiers. That's correct. Because after all, I'm a king. I'm a king. I'm a meat king. That's correct. Now, whether Germany doesn't accept, I'm sorry, they got no choice. I was born a Treviranus. That's correct. And I will always be a Treviranus, despite I'm a brown now. That's correct. But you people, you dare use me like cargo like that. How would you feel? Why don't you use Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II like a piece of chattel or a cargo? That way you can just dump whatever you feel like it. When you feel like torturing, that's correct. When you feel like you want to get even with somebody, especially her people, you what? You'll drug Your Majesty. That's right. You'll torture her. You'll teach her lessons. You'll even do the same to her royal family. Why don't you try doing that and see what's going to happen? You would all be put to death. Believe me, executions would have been carried out. It's not a question of Your Majesty Queen Elizabeth II now is what? No, I'm sorry, Your Majesty, but you didn't do your job as a sovereign head. That's correct. And for that reason, I'm justified in what I'm saying. That's correct. I've got my own monarch, my private, meek little monarch, but I mean, at least you're being far more privileged than me in terms of financially. It's a good thing that your people have shown loyalty. But I pray to God that Your Majesty, that what? That the reignship of your, that's right, that your private monarch, the reignship of your monarch will last long, because it's not going to last long. And I mean that. That's correct. Your Majesty, everybody prior to what? That's correct. Let's hope that every English person out there on this planet that is listening right now, that's correct, doesn't have an attitude where they feel the need to torture other people. And I mean anybody. On your behalf, Your Majesty, Your Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II. Every time somebody says something about your Royal Highness and your monarch, they get down to, I pray to God that kind of attitude doesn't rub off. Because it can only mean, I can only imagine, the fact that they doubt to me here, only because of my so-called Samoan heritage. That's correct, my indigenous heritage. You have the nerve to give my hand what? To hand me to be tortured by the what, brown niggers, by the indigenous so-called criminals of this country, by the so-called people that belong to the Māori king. Queen Victoria would be shameful. Her Majesty Queen Victoria would be ashamed. And she would say, I bestow a new title. I would like to rename this country that's called the Long White Cloud to the Long White Shame, to the Long White Whakama. That's correct. What a horrible country, what a terrible example to be set by the crown. And let alone all the English settlers. That's correct. What a terrible example. I being, the queen who respected and accepted, but also recognized that the rights of indigenous people of this country. I am appalled. I am utterly appalled at their so-called arrogance and their evil, their behavior, their criminal behaviors. That's correct. So barbaric behaviors. That was never nothing of the treaty of any sort. They have wasted. I revoke. Her Majesty Queen Victoria will take back all the blessings that the people of Aotearoa received regarding the signing of the treaty partnership, because, well, she would be sadly, she would not be resting. She would be turning in her grave if she knew what these people were capable of and what they did to this meek noble, that's correct, who was more worthy than any royal monarch ever on this planet. This is probably, this is the first in all the history of all the royal monarchs in the South Pacific where a meek monarch, that's correct, was tortured and taught lessons and harmed by the people of Crywater and by the sovereign head of England, or the sovereign head of Aotearoa, New Zealand, and also by members of the Crown, a government. How despicable is that? This is probably the saddest revelation I have made today. That New Zealand, Aotearoa, they do not deserve any of the blessings that Her Majesty Queen Victoria had given them via the signing of the treaty. In fact, she forfeits, and she wants to undo that through Her Majesty Queen Snow Brown. Her Majesty has expressed and extended her wishes. She would like the treaty partnership to be revoked, and all the blessings that the people of Crywater, people of Aotearoa received to be what? To be reversed, to be reversed. They had obviously forgotten humble beginnings, that's correct, but they had forgotten what it was like for them prior to the signing of the treaty. And obviously, they were the wrong Indigenous people to be given such a privilege, let alone to be chosen. That's correct. And I'm sadly deep in fact, I mourn. That's correct. Because now they deserve the death penalty and the torturings, just like the Jews, by the Nazi soldiers for the atrocities that this meek noble suffered at the hands of their own people, and even at the hands of the government of New Zealand, and even at the hands of a sovereign head that was supposed to look after, that's great, that represents nobles and royals. The conventions for royals and nobles, regardless of whether, a royal family is poor, or regardless whether a sovereign head, is on the benefit, they should have been treated far better than your commoners, let alone your criminals. The significance of this country, but the audacity, the arrogance of this country is enormous. It's incredible. And for that, I bid farewell to you, New Zealand, Aotearoa. I will always preach to you, that's correct. But as of today, and even starting on the 10th of March tomorrow, I bid farewell to all of you. I am no longer Dr. Snow Brown is no longer part of Aotearoa, New Zealand. She is now officially part of America. As you can all see that when you enter my kingdom. So if I were you, and this is the wishes of also of Her Majesty Queen Victoria, is that because she has reversed the so-called treaty partnership, she doesn't want any of you to enter the kingdom, Crystal Kingdom Church TV. If you were going to be far more loyal to Queen Elizabeth II and loyal to the Māori King, His Royal Highness Tuihaetia Pōtautau Te Wherowhero VII, and his son, and you were going to uphold your rights under the treaty above everything else and above even my private little monarch in my kingdom that was born in your country, then I'm afraid you do not deserve to enter my kingdom anymore. That is correct. And you should not be accessing it, and you should not be using it either. And I mean that to every citizen of New Zealand. Because now we're at war, because now I declare war. To the people of New Zealand, Aotearoa, on behalf of Her Majesty Queen Victoria, and on behalf of all the Māori nobles who signed the treaty, who unfortunately also want to be reversed, want the same document to be reversed because they do not like their people, what they've become, and they do not want to have anything to do with their people because they don't deserve any blessings, whether it be from them or another white man. Amen, amen. None of you deserves nothing. So now what? Now you got nothing. You don't have any kingdom. No, they don't deserve any kingdom. They need to earn their own. Now they will just have to contend with the fact that there's going to be war in their backyard. And it will come in the form of Nazi soldiers. And it's their right to come to tell you, New Zealand, that we're going to teach you a lesson. That's correct. And when the government of Germany has a right to overrule your country for what you've done, you no longer have, your treaty is gone. That's correct. The dead, to appease the dead, they say, I'm sorry, but we do not like what we have seen and what we have heard. And for them to undo every blessing that every Māori noble, that's correct, signed regarding that treaty, and even Queen Victoria signed when she gave the blessings, I'm afraid it's all gone. Such a shame, isn't it? When people that were once poor, that's correct, forgot. Totally forgot the importance of, respect, but also accepting other people's uniqueness. That's correct. And respecting other people's so-called royalty about their so-called arrogance and racism and prejudice and selfishness. So for that, I hope you learn something, take something valuable this evening, because you are not welcome in my kingdom anymore. I don't know you. I don't know you. I'm an utter stranger to all of you. I've never really known any of you, really. And I don't want to know any of you anymore, because I'm leaving your country. But you all need to learn to leave me alone. Don't enter my kingdom. Don't target me. Don't apply your arbitrary dictatorships. Hell, they don't apply anymore. I'm completely cut off from you guys. That's correct. Right. But at least you now understand how I feel. That's correct. And why I say what I say. So when I come out there in your communities, don't say anything to this noble, because I don't exist in your reality. I don't exist. Now is the time for you all to move on. That's correct. And let me leave your country peacefully. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.